Chapter 9. Watching the sky become a deep red, almost purple at times, as the sun set was one of Joachim's favorite pastimes. By the year 1850, Joachim had seen somewhere in the area of 105,800 sunsets, each one as eloquent as the last, each one more spectacular than the last. As he lay flat on his back, looking up through the hole in the car's ceiling, he saw only the colorful effects of the sunset. He could tell the position of the sun as the colors changed. He watched silently as the boundless blue was overtaken by the orange creeping up from the horizon. The orange gave way to the first fiery, then blood red. The red metamorphosized into mauve and then faded into purple. Purple is the sun's last chance at greatness. When the nuclear circle in the heavens ducked behind the horizon, it would paint the sky in its final attempt to be remembered until the next day. Joachim watched as the light dissolved into the blue-black easel of the night sky. The stars winked down at him. "That was a good sunset," he said, as he sat up, "but I miss the African skies. Africa has the best sunsets of all the continents." "You still haven't been to two of them," George replied, swaying back and forth with the movement of the train. George and Joachim, predicting the impending war in America, had traveled back to Europe only to find that landmass in an equal amount of turmoil. They headed east, almost making it to India, but turned south when they reached the Persian Gulf. They crossed the Red Sea, the direction opposite that which Moses led his people across, and moved down the eastern coast of Africa. About 30 miles south of the equator, they cut east, both of them feeling a bad presence coming from the vicinity of the Cape. Upon reaching western shores, they came across some European settlements. One man in the southernmost town was starting a carnival to travel up the coast and eventually back into Europe. George and Joachim both joined and worked for 20 years in the show business as the carnival made its way west along the coast, picking up new acts and entertaining for as long as it could before moving on. Those first 20 years were the hardest. Moving slowly, trying to keep a constant profit, George and Joachim kept a low profile and set up tents during those years. By the time the carnival started heading north, it was a money-making business that traveled by horse and wagon. A few acrobats had joined and taught George and Joachim how to limber themselves up. 10 years later, and halfway up the coast, George and Joachim had made themselves into an act by contorting their bodies into bizarre shapes. After working that act for 3 years, the ringleader was going to close up shop. He had been working for 30 years at the carnival, and now he wanted to return to his native Hungary before his days were up. Joachim and George stepped in and bought the circus from him. They continued up the coast, taking on new acts and buying the captured exotic creatures of Africa to display in cages. They made it over the Atlas Mountains just as the century was turning. They set up and celebrated the changing of the century by having the mother of all parties in Casablanca long before Sam and Rick arrived. A young Spanish man, wealthy enough to afford a trip south, was amazed by the performance and offered to help the two owners transport the show across the Strait of Gibraltar and promote it in Europe. They jumped at the chance, and by 1908, they were traveling north by rail through Europe. "I meant the best of the continents we've been on." Joachim stretched and yawned. George looked up from his paper. "All we have is East Asia and Australia left." He put the paper down. Something tells me we should get out of Europe by the end of the decade. Why's that? There's a lot of economic tension. There's going to be another war soon. And is humanity going to realize its true roots this century? Joachim joked. So it took a little longer than I expected, but the theory of evolution is out there. And people are still running to myths and religions rather than scientific facts. Your good Dr. Huxley tried to unite them with his agnosticism, but that seemed to be nothing more than the ramblings of a philosopher in a non-religious format. At least the man tried. Who's to say it won't catch on after a while? Maybe with the educated population. But what about the rest of the world? They still have their myths and religions. The young attendant, James, burst into the car, sweaty and out of breath from running the length of the train. He spoke in urgent, panting tones. "Mr. Jenner, Mr. Dupre, Kayla is in trouble. You must come look at her." George and Joachim looked at each other. "Finish reading your paper. I'll handle this," Joachim said. Joachim walked through the train towards the back, with James following him. James continued talking, but Joachim couldn't hear him over the rattle of the wheels. When they reached the second-to-last car, Joachim saw Kayla, one of the animal trainers, lying on her cot in the fetal position. She was jittery and shivering. Her eyes were wide, and she looked scared. Joachim sat next to her and touched her shoulder. She flinched away from him and curled into a tighter ball. "I told you, Mr. Jenner, she's gone crazy," James said. "Kayla." He tried to turn her towards him, and she began screaming. He persisted, and she began to flail. She yelled something about the movement of the train. Then she threw her guts up. Joachim stepped back and wiped the spew off his sleeve. Kayla curled back up. "She gone crazy and sick. We have to get away from her." Joachim looked at his hand and recognized the little pieces of wood fibers. "She hasn't gone crazy. She's ingested some root. Probably got it from the fire breathers." He sat back down next to her and turned her toward him gently. "Kayla, it's me. It's Joachim. I'm right here holding you." "Stop the train. You gotta stop the train." She looked pale and her eyes were half closed. "No, I don't have to stop the train. You've been riding this train for 2 years. You are used to the motion of the train." She became calm and opened her eyes a little wider. "It's hurting me," Kayla said. "I know, but it will pass. You have to trust your body to work this out." Her eyes became glazed. "The color is changing, getting brighter." She closed her eyes. "They're so bright, spinning, spinning." She opened her eyes. "It's making me sick." "It's only in your mind." Joachim looked up to James. "I need something to occupy her mind." As the idea came to him, Joachim got Kayla to her feet. She couldn't keep her balance, and James had to help keep her steady. He picked up an old newspaper from the floor and sat her back down on the cot. He made her read the 3-week-old paper. She stumbled through the first 2 sentences, then she settled into a flow. Joachim got up and had James stay with her to keep her reading as he went to get something to occupy her mind. As he made his way back to the front of the train, he passed through the fire breather's car. "Jensen!" He yelled the leader's name. Jensen lifted his head off his straw pillow. "Yeah." It was more of a groan than a word. "Get yourself up. I'll be right back. I have a few words to speak with you." The car remained silent as Joachim exited. He went back up to the front car where George was still reading. He filled his partner in on the situation as he grabbed the Bible from the tiny table. George offered help, but Joachim declined. When he walked back into the fire-breather's car, he felt a pang of fear, not from himself, but from those around him. Jeanson stood at the other end of the car with his arms folded at chest level. "Mr. Joachim, what are these words you have for me?" Joachim walked through the car, but stopped in the middle when Jeanson hadn't moved. "You gave root to Kayla," Joachim said. "How do you know it was me?" Jeanson walked slowly towards his employer. "I know of no one else who uses the root." Jeanson walked within arm's reach of Joachim, his arms still folded, trying to intimidate his boss. Joachim didn't flinch, wince, or retract in any manner. He kept himself focused on this momentary nemesis that approached. He didn't realize, though, that a man in a cot to his left had taken an interest in the book he was holding. The man was literally shaking with anticipation. "Can I be held responsible if the girl wanted to expand her perception of life?" "No, but you are responsible for giving her the means to alter that perception. It is not appreciated." "What are you going to do about it?" Jeanson leaned forward slightly to accent these words. A silence fell over the car as Joachim wondered if he should have brought George with him. The man to his left fell out of the cot and onto his knees between Jeanson and Joachim. "Please, you must save us, please! Jeanson is the devil!" Another man from the left fell to his knees. "Yes, you must help us!" One by one, every man in the car began to repeat the plea for help to Joachim, claiming that Jeanson was the devil. Jeanson stood in the same stance, staring at Joachim with a devil's grin across his face. Joachim looked around to all the men. "I'm sorry, but I don't believe in the devil." "You carry the book of the Catholic God," Jeanson taunted. Joachim looked down to the Bible he held, then up to Jeanson's eyes. "So I am." Joachim lurched forward in a flash and punched Jeanson in the jaw, sending him to the floor. Every man in the car began to cheer as Joachim continued towards the back of the train. Jeanson grabbed his shirt sleeve as he passed by. "I am not an evil man, but the devil has captured my soul." His voice reeked of desperation. "Please, you must help me chase him away. You must help me leave this existence. Please, help me out of this life." Joachim looked at him with concern. "Lay off the root." As Joachim turned to walk out, Jeanson's neediness turned to rage, and little drops of drool flew out of his mouth as he screamed at Joachim. "You should not place your faith in such a book. You should beware of false gods. You should beware of that religion of lies." Joachim shook his head as he closed the car's door. He brought the book to Carla and told her to read it until she fell asleep. He instructed James to keep an eye on her and not to let her near the animal cages. He also told his assistant that, should she tire of reading, he should read the passages for her until she slept. Joachim began to walk towards the front of the train in silence. He thought, "It's my opinion that the Catholic Bible was written for the purpose of entertaining those who do not have a firm grasp on reality. That doesn't mean that one has to be under the influence of a hallucinogenic drug to enjoy the stories in it. It just means that the Bible is meant to be taken figuratively rather than literally. In all honesty, how can humans expect to minimize the chaos caused by interpretive differences unless we can agree that the Bible has only passive meaning in the shared reality? The Holy Book is meant to create a pattern of thought inside a mind that would reflect a caring, understanding, self-sacrificing person to the world. There are humans who are born with the understanding of the divine that religions hope to instill in their congregations. Those people find the idea of faith in words written millennia ago amusing. Those people know that a prayer and a wish are the same thing on the individual level. Those people realize that it is not so much the words of the prayer that are important, but that the prayers are spoken in unison by a large group of people to get the desired results. When people band together for an exact common cause, their spirits link together to form a power larger than the group. This power can move pieces of this world around to form a miracle. The only problem is that humanity usually fires off a miracle without aiming it at anything specific. The Catholic religion, as an example, will bring a great number of people together and swirl that spiritual energy around until a vision of the Virgin Mary appears before them. A miracle such as this helps to strengthen the faith of the witnesses, but it doesn't really have a great impact on the world. That is because those people are low-powered conductors for this spiritual force. Individually, they are weak in the spirit, but as a group, they can shape civilizations. There are those who find God through work. They are stationary conductors, content and confident of the divine in them. They stand, directing the flow of the masses. Then there are the improvisationalists that act as superconductors for the spiritual force by challenging its actuality. If the spiritual guidelines are true, the energy of a large group can be doubled or tripled. And the ones who use knowledge to discover the divine are the generators of that power. They are the ones who communicate the ideas that people put their faith into. The writers of the Bible are definitely classed into that last category. Passing through the fire breather's car, Jensen asks Joachim again to help him free his soul from the confines of this existence. Joachim shook the man off his coat sleeve and told him to go to sleep. Jensen told him he doesn't know what it's like to be locked in life. Joachim laughed at this as he walked away. Jensen cursed him as the car door closed. Joachim began to think as he continued forward. By the time he reached his car, his partner could plainly see the turmoil on his face. "What's on your mind?" George asked. "What makes you think I'm thinking?" "I can see it in your eyes. They're portals to your soul." He stood and walked to the small couch across the car from the table Joachim sat at. "So no games. What's troubling you?" Joachim sighed. "I'm afraid if I bring it up, our luck would run out." "Do you really believe luck has brought us this far?" "I just can't think of any other explanation for it." "For what?" George asked. "For our extended lives." "Do you feel you really need an explanation? You would question such a gift from God?" Joachim wasn't expecting a reference to God from his friend. "I wish I knew why this is." "Perhaps you need to make your own definition." George got up and walked to his trunk, taking out a bottle of sherry and 2 glasses. He handed one to his friend and poured as he spoke. "Perhaps all living creatures need to define their lives. If a being only had to define its life to fulfill its destiny, the world would be a much simpler place." Joachim drank half the cup. "It's not only the definition." George sat back at the table. "It's the belief in that definition. If one only needs to believe oneself, then where would the challenge in life be?" "I'm not talking about tricking the mind into belief. That's easy and doesn't necessarily bring inner peace. There is a point where you know that what you think, what you feel, and what you are is true. A solid truth in a world of inconsistencies." The fire breathers believe Jensen's the devil. Does that make him so? Only if he believes them. And not with his mind, with— George struggled to find the word. With his fire, with the essence of his soul, the part of ourselves that brings us consciousness yet cannot be detected by our physical senses. The divine fire. You're beginning to sound like a religious man. Joachim said this as he emptied his glass. Not religious, spiritual. George emptied his glass. He lifts the bottle and fills the cups again, speaking as he goes. Imagine this. There is a great flame of existence that is completely self-aware and on a higher plane of consciousness than we are. On top of this fire is what looks like a patch quilt. Every patch is a world comprised of time and space in infinite variations, so that no two are exactly alike. The great fire is held within those boundaries and forced into the vehicles that can move through those worlds. Animals, plants, humans, higher beings, and what have you. They all are the embodiment of this fire. The fire moves the vehicles until the vehicles can move no more. Then the fire jumps to another resident being until it reaches the edge of the patch. Then it moves into the next world, and the next world, and the next, until it is reunited with the other sparks, and they form into the great fire to burn away the limiting worlds. George leaned back on the chair. It seems as though we've found a way to prolong the use of our vehicles, and I believe it is done by tapping into the spirit. Joachim leaned forward. I don't, my friend. I always imagined the spirit to be a limiting factor in this world, much like the mind and body are, that we become separated from the divine and fall through 3 planes of existence, the soul, the mind, and the body. We land in this world and have to use those tools to help us find a path back. Then what would your explanation of our elongated lifetimes be? Joachim sat back and shook his head. I don't know. Then perhaps that is what kept us here for this amount of time, the ignorance of our situation and the apathy that followed. George looked down to the table. Not any longer. What are you saying? I believe it's time to move on. I was thinking of venturing out to study with spiritual masters in India and farther east. Are you tired of this life? Are you tired of me? No. I just feel a conflict coming on the horizon, and the only safe lands will be South Asia. What are you talking about? There has been an outbreak of alliances in Europe. This could be a great time of peace, and we could be the entertainment for the new world. Although leaders are making deals and the media is informing the masses of these deals, that doesn't mean that the masses agree. If there were only a way to confine a social system within boundaries, humans could study their own large-scale behavior, help to avoid mistakes. Joachim began thinking. Humans have fought over land for eons. George stood to replace the bottle in his trunk. You'd have to put that experiment on the bottom of the ocean.